Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my time in office, my staff and I have heard from countless small, rural, local governments that they do not understand often why they are not awarded federal grants, especially if they meet all the listed criteria when applying. The Grant Transparency Act, along with my colleague on the other side of the aisle, Ms. Crockett, would ensure that these applicants can better understand that criteria being evaluated in the application process for federal grants. Many times, grant applicants feel as though the decisions are being made behind closed doors and they just don't understand. This bill would require government agencies to shine a light on their decision-making processes. With this legislation, federal government agencies would be required to disclose their selection methods for awarding competitive grants. Our local governments back home deserve that transparency. State and local governments across South Carolina's 7th Congressional District and really nationwide compete for federal grant money on a continual basis. Federal grant money allows investment to come to our communities and improve the daily lives of our constituents, ranging from sewer and wastewater systems, airports, fire stations, and recreational facilities. These are all things that we rely on and utilize in our daily lives. But applying for federal grants can be a complicated process, especially if you don't have the staff in which to do it. Grant writers and applicant staff may even sometimes be unaware of which selection criteria are weighted more heavily. And so after a grant applicant concludes the process, they are often left wondering why they were or were not chosen for a particular award. But if they knew ahead of time what to focus on, they would be set up for success. While federal regulations include a detailed description of the required contents for notice of funding opportunities, we have found that many federal government agencies are inconsistent with transparency in the selection criteria. For example, a DOT grant could be way different than an EPA grant notice in terms of what is included up front. Grant writers really have to navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth when working on applications, and so that is what prompted this legislation. The Grant Transparency Act of 2023 addresses these uncertainties by clarifying the award selection criteria within the grant application process. Specifically, the bill requires in law that the grant-making agency notice of funding opportunity for competitive grants have three things. One, a description of any rating system, evaluation, and selection criteria the agency uses to assess applicants for competitive grants. Two, a statement on whether the agency uses a weighted scoring method and a description of that method. And three, any other qualitative or quantitative merit-based approach the agency uses to evaluate applications for competitive grants. I think we all can agree that applicants deserve to be able to give it their best shot when they are applying for federal funds. Grants should be awarded based on merit and not any type of political favoritism. With this legislation, grant applicants for federal grants would have access to the proper information on an agency's criteria and methodology when submitting the application. And if an applicant does not receive a grant, they should know how that decision was made. Grant applicants put in many hours fixing up their applications, gaining local support, and dotting their I's and crossing their T's. I'm proud to have supported this bipartisan legislation that would give the tools in the toolbox to our grant applicants in South Carolina and across the country. At the end of the day, my constituents sent me to Washington to represent them and make Washington actually work for them and not against them. The Grant Transparency Act makes Washington work better for my constituents back home and across the country. It is these small changes that can actually make a real difference. So today I urge my colleagues to vote in support of the Grant Transparency Act and to get this one step closer across the finish line. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.